5 years after its release, the continued relevance of this headphone today cannot be overstated. Let's find out why. Kaldas Research, founded by Omkar Chandan, is India's first high-end headphone company, and the RR1 Conquest, released in February of 2019, is their first headphone. The RR1 Conquest is an electrostatic headphone, and as such, running these with a specialized amplifier is a requirement. For the context of this review, all my sound impressions come from it being paired with a Stax SRM313, fed by the Fuzzy Audio SK02 DAC and the SK01 preamp. For this review, we will look at the RR1 Conquest Premium, which retails for $650, however the regular version is available for $500. Unfortunately, my package was completely violated by DHL Customs Services, so I was not able to record a true unboxing video. But let's take a look at what you get in the box. Inside the cardboard box, you'll find a wooden display case with an acrylic lid and laser-etched Kaldas Research logo on the front. Upon arrival, my lid was screwed in place with 4 small screws, so I had to use a screwdriver to get inside. The shaped foam on the inside of the box does a decent job of storing the headphone safely, and it's supposed to double up as a display case. Personally, I think their foam is quite ugly, especially in the way it catches the light, so I can't really say I'm a fan of it on the whole. Also, upon arrival, the 2 Allen keys required for adjusting the headband were inserted into the foam as seen. I think with a bit of effort, a simple velvet fabric mod could transform it into an attractive display case. Also included in the premium package, I found 4 extra suspension headband straps, 2 extra large and 2 regular, and an extra set of ear pads. There's also a lot of documentation to go through, including a getting started guide and several user guides about caring for and maintaining your RR1. Also included is a measurement certificate unique to your headphone, taken with the Grass 45BB-14 Kima with the KB5000/5001 anthropomorphic pin-eye and several other pieces of equipment listed on the certificate. Included is the frequency response graph and the channel matching data. Also included in the whole package was a 5-year anniversary brochure, which goes over the history and journey of Omkar and his company, a few shoutouts, and finally, a hint of things to come. The Inox has just been announced by Kaldas earlier this month. It's the world's first commercial closed-back electrostatic headphone with Harman Target compliance, which cannot be overstated as a uniquely profound technical achievement. With that in mind, I find it even more poignant to take a very close look at the RR1. As usual, let's start off with how it fares as a tool to be used, an item to be worn, and an object to behold. This headphone is a beautiful curiosity at every angle, and a well thought out design. Every part of the headband is assembled with socket cap screws of various sizes, no doubt tightened to spec. This approach rejects compromise and has been implemented with maximum care and attention to detail. There is absolutely no rattle, creaking, or high tolerance in any of the joints. This is just about the highest build quality I have ever beheld in a headphone. The ergonomics of the headband is, however, another matter. The first oddity is found when you take this headphone out of the box. The 2 main large socket screws that connect the headband to the backs of the cups must be tightened to fit your head. This is essentially a fixed cup rotation mechanism that you set and forget. Failure to comply with this step will result in poor consistent fit, and the headband will scratch the tops of the headphone cups. The suspension strap is the same and requires setting with an Allen key before use. This is definitely one of those cases where even if you've owned or tried out 500 different headphones, you cannot skip the first step of reading the instructions and following through. The second thing about the headband is the clamping pressure. I found it to be on the slightly extreme side, so I carefully bent out the tight angles on the headband frame to alleviate this pressure. No doubt some of you will find this approach barbaric, but it has worked just as well on my Grado SR80, Biodynamic GT770, and Sennheiser HD650, all of which have spring steel headband parts. From my point of view, allowing the user to tension the clamping force as they see fit is a crucial part of good headphone design. Sure, most common types of headphone designs don't need this kind of adjustment, but the RR1 is clearly far from common. After bending the headband, I found that I could easily wear it for over an hour or two without discomfort. Looking at the injection molded nylon cups, the design of their shape might appear to be an arbitrary choice that is purely aesthetic, but that is far from the truth. Any seasoned headphone modder can tell you that these half cups will eliminate the seashell effect. Just cup your hands around the edge of these headphones or any large planar and you will hear what I mean. This effect is of course much more pronounced on the RR1 as most of the cup edges have been removed already. In short, the design improves the overall sense of air and reduces unwanted resonance. The protruding parts of the cups at the top and bottom won't affect the sound too much and also provide a lot of real estate for handling the headphones while taking them on and off your head, and for the much appreciated mini XLR sockets, making these one of the few electrostatic headphones with detachable cables. Another interesting aspect of the cups are the two large ports or vents on the backs of the cups. The only reason these exist is to prevent air pressure changes in the chamber to prevent the driver from flexing when taking these on and off or moving. Otherwise, the diaphragm can touch one of the stators and discharge. It's also a good way of preventing excess flex, which may damage the diaphragm over time or quite suddenly with one strong pressure increase. I've noticed that some users report that closing off these vents, or mostly closing them, can lead to a superior bass performance. More on that later. Going back to the cables, exposing the cables from the sockets to the transducers and making it part of the headphone design is a stroke of genius. Rarely does one get to observe such a clever twist on form following function. The cable itself uses 2.5 meters of thick and heavy German Sommer cable. This length is only available in the premium package. The standard version ships with the 1.5 meter cable. I found that this cable is just good, honest, hard-wearing, and no nonsense. Due to the extra clamping force of the headphones, its extra girth and weight does not become unwieldy or jerk the headphone around, and having the option to use DIY or custom cables with mini XLR termination is also great, although it may prove difficult to find third-party 5-pin Stax plugs. Going back to the cups, it's important to mention there is almost nothing between the transducers and the open air. Normally, drivers are protected by a rear grille or mesh, yet here we have a fully open back and front, protected only by dust screens. I think, on one hand, it's easy to criticize these two choices. Grills will provide protection, but they can also ruin the sound. Then there's the choice of dust screen. It appears to be a very common, cheap type of dust filter fabric that you might find on other consumer electronics. Now, on one hand, I ask myself why they didn't opt for the type of microweave fabric that is found on the back of Stax Lambda drivers. But, as a modder, I fully understand that if something does the same job at a fraction of the cost, and can be easily repaired or restored at home even in 50 or 100 years when spare parts are no longer available, the choice becomes obvious. The ear pads will also be a cause of concern for some. These pads are very large and open, but some of the thinnest I have ever seen. Obviously, the goal here is to provide as much comfort as possible with the least deviation, as any change in the distance from the ear to the driver will affect the frequency response. I think my ears are either average or a touch smaller than average, as I never had any problems with any over-ear headphones, including small portable headphones. But I have to say, this is a very personal thing, as I don't mind when ear pads touch the outside edges of my ears. I have only ever had problems with constant pressure from on-ear pads, so even though my ears also do touch the dust screens, it's not a cause of discomfort. In the end, the comfort is more than adequate for multiple hours of listening, But the party piece of this headphone's ergonomics is that it's the best headphone I've ever worn for light headbanging. Moving your head around normally and looking up and down won't make it shift in the slightest. This is not your average electrostatic. It sounds like a headphone. If you've auditioned or own the world's best headphone system, the Sennheiser HE1, you'll have an idea of what I'm talking about, as the RR1, I think, follows a similar philosophy. Every single one of the vintage electrostatic headphones and the more modern Stax Lambdas I've tried out didn't sound anything like the more common dynamics or planar headphones that we're used to. The main two things people typically notice with those electrostatics are the lack of lower bass energy and the extremely detailed ethereal treble. This has of course led to Stax headphones in particular receiving both endless praise for having god-tier levels of detail, but also infamy at not being suitable for many music genres with either emphasis or strong bass in the mix. Of course, there are always exceptions, and while I'm overgeneralizing, these stereotypes have often proven true for many, including myself. The RR1, however, subverts all those expectations. Imagine the staging and musicality of the Sennheiser HD650 with an almost completely neutral frequency response, combined with the speed and detail of an electrostatic transducer. This might come across as hyperbolic, but the only other headphone I've ever heard that gave me this kind of feeling was the Sennheiser HE1. Of course, while these two headphones cannot and should not be compared directly, the RR1 possesses so many of the qualities I think many people will appreciate at a tiny fraction of the cost. Let's take a quick look at two frequency response graphs. The first graph looks a bit broken, but the electrostatic nerds and measure betas will know what's up. This kind of problem has always existed when trying to measure Stax electrostatics. Basically, the graph does not accurately represent what you hear. So while many Stax headphones do suffer from a lack of bass and sub-bass, the graphs have also sometimes exaggerated it, while emphasizing the bass around 100 Hz just before the observable roll-off. So with that said, here's the RR1 graph with the rear vents closed for a much more accurate representation of what these headphones sound like. Listening to the RR1 back and forth with these vents open and closed, I barely notice any difference. So for the sake of this review, we will focus on the closed vent graph as the closest representation of how this headphone sounds. Personally, the only significant point of focus here is the dip between 1.5 kHz that goes back up around 6 kHz. This kind of scoop has often been described as the method of achieving artificial soundstage. It does not negatively impact the sound or timbre and just makes the headphone sound smoother, bigger, and more musical. Aside from that, the slight roll-off on both ends was easily remedied by my Fuzzy Audio SK01's tone controls. Although, throughout most of my listening time with the RR1, I barely ever touched the treble, adding only a little more bass, but as you can guess, these small adjustments completely depend on the recording, if required at all. Ultimately, this tuning reminds me of only two other headphones. Firstly, my modified Hi-Fi-Man HE500, which is significantly more neutral than the brighter stock version, and is a touch on the warm side. The RR1 sounds more neutral and has a bit less drama, but much more detail and far better separation. Speaking of separation, there's one test I really like to perform with high-end headphones, which is a sort of high, mid-range and treble to bass separation test. Basically, play a sample of electronic music and observe if the bass kicks reduce the volume of long, consistent upper frequency sounds. One such example of this is Neck Brace by Ratatat, where at 18 seconds in, there is a hollow sounding percussive noise that reverbs for a few seconds. There is only one headphone I have heard that can separate these sounds correctly, the Sennheiser HE1, and for that, every other headphone has been utterly ruined for me, but it has also given me the ultimate benchmark for proper separation. Going back to the RR1, I would need to do some careful A/B testing with other headphones. I don't have it at hand right now, but I think it has the third best separation I've ever heard, just behind or possibly equal to the TNA Solitaire P. To be clear, these two headphones crushed almost the entire competition in this regard, reaching about 85% of the HE1's separation ability, which doesn't sound great at first, but almost other normal high-end headphones dither around the 70 to 75% mark of the HE1's ability. But I also know that most people don't care as much about the niche aspects as you want to know if it just sounds good or not. So, what's the other headphone the RR1 reminds me of most? That's the Oppo PM1 with its original velour pads. It's not only close in tonal response, but also in its overall personality and performance. When I tried out the PM1 for a week or two, I enjoyed everything about it. But since my modified HE500 was so similar and also had the lead on a more engaging soundstage, I had no reason to acquire a PM1 for myself. The RR1 takes everything I enjoyed about the PM1, which is an easy A-tier headphone, and puts it at an S-tier with its superior detail and separation while retaining musicality. When a headphone sounds as perfect as the RR1, even I could forgive its lack of expansive sound staging. The bass is deep and fast with planar-like timbre, but don't push the bass EQ too much or you will encounter distortion faster than you would with a planar. The mid-range is on the smoother side and doesn't artificially push vocals or other instruments to the front. The treble is well extended but sacrifices a touch of air in order to rein in the piercing frequencies. So Stax Lambda users will likely perceive the RR1 as being less detailed and airy, but these are assuredly near the attainable limit of detail reproduction for most mortals. This is the singular best headphone I've ever owned. It is a design and engineering masterpiece with a sound to match, and has all but completely eradicated any lust I have harbored towards headphones costing multiple thousands of euros. It's also responsible for allowing me to hear things in the music I have not heard before, which I am fortunate enough to say has not happened to me in years. If you're willing to invest a little patience into finding a good vintage Stax amp, this headphone, including the modern source components also required to adequately run this headphone, should have no reason to exceed a total of 1,000 to 1,200 euros. In an age where high-end headphones alone are far exceeding this price point, while surprisingly often offering far less, I can only give this headphone my fullest recommendation for anyone seeking flagship tier performance on a tighter budget. In most cases, bass heads and soundstage junkies need not apply, but for some people looking for the clear, definitive upgrade from the Sennheiser HD650 or Oppo PM1, this is it. Well, this or the Sennheiser HE1. Take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.